Hello, everyone. My name is Joris Peels, and I'm a writer at 3dprint.com and also a vice president of consulting at Additive Manufacturing Research. And it is my honor to present to you this webinar today. What we're going to be doing is talking about digital O&P workflows, the good, the bad, and the considerations. And the idea is to give you a informed, educational, accurate look at how an O&P workflow would work, how you would, as an orthotist or prosthetician, or in your practice, or as a technician, how you would use additive manufacturing, 3D printing in your workflow, and where it makes sense and when it makes sense and things like that. Today, we have a number of polls for you, and we'd love for you to participate in these polls and give us some information, things to talk about, and we'd love for you to ask questions for us to really respond directly to your concerns, your questions, maybe very concrete things that are keeping you from using additive, or things you think you can or can't do with additive. Things, you could ask us about numbers, you could ask us about certain types of parts you could make, and we could really have a good discussion about that. Now, we is myself and Dustin Kumpkin, and Dustin is an application engineer at HP. He's been there for 8 years. He's worked over 12 years in additive. And he has worked before as a training manager in application development and regional roles. And he started actually as a startup founder, and he's been working at it, so 12 years on the engineering front, making things possible for automotive, for orthotics and prosthetics, and all sorts of other kind of markets as well. And he's worked on the world's largest mustache, the world's largest 3D printed mustache, also on automotive prototyping, and also end-use products and things like that. So he's a good person with a lot of experience to teach us. And yeah, of course, in the O&P industry, a lot of stuff has been going on with additive manufacturing, and a lot of players have been converted. And we know in orthotics and prosthetics, what we know is part art, it's part craft, it's part talking to people and understanding people's needs. And oftentimes you have to invent things that are completely new. You have to come up with parts that are very, very different, very unique. You have to kind of customize parts. You have to make parts that are made with a lot of sweat, make parts with a lot of experience, and some parts can be quite fairly standard. And combining that craft with understanding people and with developing needs and solutions for their needs is, of course, what makes O&P unique. It's very, very different than many other businesses. And so that's why it's an interesting challenge. That's part of the reason also why it's such a good match for additive manufacturing and 3D printing, that uniqueness and that manufacturability of parts, and making that unique wish or that unique need come to light. So to tell us more about that is Dustin. So welcome to this webinar, Dustin.
Thank you so much for having me, Joris. Really glad to be here.
All right, so yeah, off to Dustin's presentation. Remember, if you have any questions, just pop them in the sidebar there and ask us any questions. We'll get to them. We'll have a moment in the middle of the presentation where we can also take some questions and have a little discussion, so that's good as well. And yeah, over to you, Dustin.
Thank you so much, Joris. And as Joris mentioned, we will be having a couple of polls today. As many of you guys already know, it is live already, seeing some of the results coming in. We'll be displaying that here shortly, but from what I can see from those who have been voting so far, it looks like the vast majority of people who are attending today are in exactly the right place. This is a big thing to consider when it comes to digital workflows. So I'm really excited that you guys are here. And we're hoping that we can give you guys something of value that you can act on and move forward with. So let's go ahead and get started. So as many of you guys may have hopefully seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's what we're basing this on. I think it's always important to look at all those different categories of, a certain sector, so that you're very aware and soberly aware of what you're approaching if you're planning to go down this route. So as Joris mentioned, we're going to be covering quite a few different topics today. You can see some of the different high-level topics there now. So we'll be going through things such as productivity, adoption challenges, costs, time, learning curve, regulations, compliance, a lot of different topics. We don't need to worry about that now. We'll be getting into those details. If you do have your phone handy, make sure to have it ready. We are going to have some QR codes that will display on the screen. So if you want, you can take a picture of those. It will link you directly to certain resources so that you can start learning and acting on this information today, even as we're presenting today. So get ready for that. What you'll also notice is in the lower right, I have this stamped for May 2025. If any of you are attending today that happen to be in the New York chapter of AAOP, that's where I first presented this content a couple of months back. It was pretty well received, and I would say generally speaking, people who are in the newer space really ask these same types of questions today. So we thought it made sense to rebroadcast this in a format that other people could see both now and in the future, so that as you're digging into digital workflows, you'll have a better understanding of what to think about and what to consider. All right, and if you don't know anything about me, that is quite all right. I have been in the additive manufacturing or 3D printing space now over 10 years. I've done a lot of different projects, some of them very big, if it's Comic-Con creatures, some of them even bigger, like the world's largest 3D printed mustache I've done, which is kind of wild. And I've also done quite a bit of research and development and we'll say application development when it comes to orthotics and prosthetics in particular. So you can see there are some QR codes there to some of the projects. We will have some of these more later on, but just gives you a little bit about me. Yeah, looking forward to some of your questions today. So please do put those questions in the chat as they come up. Joris and I will be discussing some of them throughout the presentation and also at the end. So we really look forward to any questions you have. Even if it sounds like a dumb question, please put it out there. If it's a dumb question, odds are someone else also has that same question. So please do throw them out there. What I'll also say too is in this space, there is no perfect way to do this when we're talking about digital workflows with orthotics and prosthetics. So I'm just going to put this disclaimer out here that I'm not recommending any particular software or machinery when it comes to this workflow. It really does depend on your particular situation of where you're located, what market you're going after, how big of a company you have, how much expertise you have. And so what I'm really trying to do here, and what I'm hoping Joris will be able to provide as well, is an overview of what this space looks like so that you can get a better understanding of, does this even make sense for me or not? All right. So if any of you have seen the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I happened to just watch it a couple of months ago, and I thought, man, this is just a classic. But towards the end of the movie, there's kind of a standoff between a lot of different people. And when I was first getting into this space, specifically with additive manufacturing in orthotics and prosthetics, and around the 2019 time period, I really felt like a lot of people in the industry had this kind of standoff type mentality. And although I can understand it and appreciate it and recognize it is important to a certain extent when you're working in the industry, I think what you'll find today with this content is that although that can make sense, you really need to be able to rely on a team and multiple teams to make this successful if you really want to be successful. So although that may have been the traditional approach, if you really want to be successful in the digital workflow space, it needs to be more collaborative than competitive. There's no doubt you're going to have your competitive edge, and I can respect that. But to be really successful with this fast-moving space, you got to be collaborative. What I'll also say is the first poll results should start be coming up now. Joris and I like to kind of get a better understanding of what kind of audience that we have here today. And as those results come up, you'll kind of see that probably over half of the crowd is brand new to this space, or has been dabbling a little bit, or maybe just buying parts. So as I was saying earlier, you're in the right space if that is the case. For those people who are more advanced and maybe you're already printing your devices or you're doing large scale production, I'm hoping that you can get a good understanding as well of what's coming down the pipe. So for those who are really advanced, we will be showing some things focus on artificial intelligence just a little bit. So stay tuned till the end for a couple pieces of information there. I'll also say that we did just launch our second poll. We will be doing 3 today, so please do vote just so that we can get a better understanding of who's in the crowd and to make sure to highlight what's important to you. So thank you so much. All right, so let's first start focusing on the good. What is the good about the digital workflow when it comes to orthotics and prosthetics? All right, so if you're brand new to this space and you're just looking at it, which it looks like there's a couple of you out there today, the good has to do with the workflow. So it follows the same basic workflow that you're probably used to doing today, but there are some differences. So high level, if we're going through the workflow, well, I'm just going to highlight right now is some of those differences. So if we're following the workflow, one of the biggest differences is instead of taking a plaster and impression, you're dealing with digital scanning to gather the actual data or geometry of your patient. The next step is you might submit an order and then a prototype is made. Traditionally, that might be done by hand. With this workflow, you might be making that device digitally. And that could be done manually, or it could be done semi-automatically, depending on what kind of software that you have. Moving forward, then you have to actually fabricate or make the actual device itself. Traditionally, as many of you know, that is done by hand. Obviously, with additive manufacturing, that is actually printed. And then from there, you're going to ship your device, fit it to the patient. If there is some issue, you might need to make some modification to it, or maybe the patient can go ahead and use it. So depending on what kind of workflow is, these are kind of the 3 large differences with those digital workflows. All right. Additionally, some good or benefits of that digital workflow is just the predictability in quality in production. So if, for example, you're making foot orthotics, many times you might have specialists who will put finishing passes or grinding of certain foot orthotics. And depending on the operator, it could be done of excellent quality, good quality, okay quality, or poor quality, or there might be differences operator to operator. One of the real benefits of additive is you get that consistency. Print after print after print, you're going to get the same looking part, and it doesn't matter who's actually operating the machine or the equipment itself. So that is one real benefit. Additionally, as you can see on the right, in one 12-hour print, you're able to do multiple different devices. And that doesn't mean you need to have multiple different operators or specialists to actually make those devices. All right, moving forward, another benefit or good part of it is less waste in space required. So it really depends on, again, what kind of devices that you're making. But I know I visited some companies who have wasted polypropylene sheets, and they couldn't even really recycle them, and they had them stacked up in the corner, and then they had to figure out where they can actually dispose of them. Well, that takes up space in processing and management, personnel management, to figure out what to do with that, which obviously is a cost because you have insurance and lighting and HVAC that you have to deal with. What I've been told by different people who are already doing this process is they say that they can make these devices in as little space as a 12-foot by 12-foot square. So depending on what your setup is, maybe that's bigger, maybe that's smaller, but it is something to be aware of. What I'll also say is you may see that the second poll results have just been revealed. So what are your biggest challenges with digital workflows today? So it looks like on the largest is either competitor positioning or CAD manipulation and management. And that's really not a surprise, I will say. I see that come up quite often. I'll be really curious what Joris has to say about that as far as large challenges. And then tied for second is both the printing process or finishing in post-processing, which is pretty common to come up. So thank you all for voting in that poll. So Joris, if you're taking notes on the other side, I know we'll be talking here in a few minutes, but let's get into CAD manipulation management and competitor positioning. I'll be really curious to see what you have to say there. Lastly, I'll just say the third poll and the final poll is now live, so please do vote on that. We'll be really curious what you have to say. All right, moving forward here. Last part of the good, at least for this slide, is tracking for compliance purposes. So many times people have been telling me, you know, Dustin, I'm really concerned that eventually insurance is really going to require extra paperwork, or maybe in order to get reimbursed, or for client tracking purposes, I'm going to have extra compliance paperwork to be able to follow through the process, what's happening. I'm not really sure how I'm going to do that today with traditional processes just because of our workflow. What does it look like in the digital process? So what I will say is a couple of years ago, or right around when I was first starting in this, that process was still pretty cumbersome. You could do it with digital processes, but it was a challenge and it still took some extra work. Luckily for those of you who are attending today and looking at this today, that process has gotten much more streamlined and much easier, such that certain software, certain processes can gather your scan data with your CAD creation process, with your printing data, and put it all together, and maybe even generate your insurance forms or compliance documentation all for you. Now, I'm not going to say it is 100% perfect because it is still developing day by day. It is developing very fast, so fast that I have a tough time keeping up with what's going on. I don't know if Joris will agree with me or not. He'll be chiming in here in a few minutes. But because a lot of these processes are connected digitally, we have a much easier job and easier time aggregating that all to one spot so that you're not looking for paperwork, you know, over in the shop versus in the back room where the accounting paperwork was done. So that is one really good process that's happening. All right, moving forward. So additionally, the good, what I want to say is designs and development have been changing, rightfully so, when we're talking about digital O&P processes. So I took some screen grabs of LinkedIn in 2021 just to kind of get a snapshot of what's happening out there. So what you'll see on the left here is some images that I grabbed, so you can see kind of what design thinking was happening and what people were trying at the time. If we jump forward about 4 years, or 4.5 years in this case, I grabbed a couple more images back in April. And what you can really see is the designs and shapes have changed a little bit. And we're seeing a little bit more focus on software and combining all those digital processes together. Some of those images there, maybe you work for those companies, or maybe you're familiar with those companies, but the designs and shapes are changing, and I expect them to continue to change as we continue to figure out what problem are we really trying to solve and what's most important for the patient itself. So with that, tech team, whenever it makes sense, feel free to pull Joris in here. And I know we are probably starting to get to some of the poll results here soon, but Joris, I know I've mentioned your name a couple of times and we've covered a lot of topics already, but I'm curious, anything kind of stand out that you think is important for the audience to be aware of?
I don't know. I think if we look at the poll results as they're coming in, we're seeing, first off, like on the first question, basically about the experience level, right? We're seeing that people are experimenting, people are looking around. Most people seem to be kind of in the pre-investment stage, kind of like, hey, what's happening? I'm trying to figure it out. I'm buying some parts, and some people are actually buying printers as well, but so there are people exploring this thing, right? And the second thing, we see that everyone is kind of split quite evenly, actually, like super split evenly about, what's the competitive positioning, what's the post-finishing, the printing itself, CAD manipulation, which seems to be a bit more kind of important. And that kind of dovetails, I think, what you did notice as well, where the industry is moving from I made a thing, to, I'm getting a kind of software system down to automate making that thing and making it part of my daily practice. And that, I think, is the big move that we're seeing, that some people are kind of going ahead with, this is a thing I do all the time. Other people are kind of saying, oh, this is a thing I do for super special cases, something weird, which never comes in. Like maybe I don't do pediatric a lot, but for pediatric, it makes sense for me. And I do it for these edge cases, if you will. And then other people are kind of in the part where they're like kind of orienting themselves, And that also kind of dovetails nicely, I think, with the poll that we're seeing those results as well. And then on the third one, what are your biggest issues? That's, I think, there's the only one with like a training. We know training is hard, let's say. I need more convincing the materials are strong enough. That's kind of really interesting. And then everyone else is kind of like a little bit split, the business model and that kind of thing. So if we look as well back to the questions that people have asked us as well, it's also kind of work related. Daryl Lim wants to know, my biggest challenge with digital workflows is justifying the cost for smaller workshops. And the other questions, well, we can deal with them a little bit later. They're a little bit different, I think. They're more like process oriented, I think. But Daryl Lim's question also kind of dovetails really well with this. So let's look at this. I think for this is like, the investment in this is a long time. We mentioned CAD. If you want to do CAD yourself, there is no, let's learn CAD in a weekend kind of thing. This will take you on average about 2,000 hours. So I think there is a kind of a question you have to ask yourselves, like, is somebody in my organization going to take the time to do this? Or am I going to outsource it? Because not a lot of people do it. You can outsource it to the States. You can outsource it to an agency. You can outsource it to an agency in India as well, by the way. This is also possible. So there is a kind of like, do we master CAD? And then the other investment is scanning, because there are simply no, like, there's no like 10 euro the structure and stuff like that, right? Which is quite affordable. But apart from that, you're going to have to invest like a couple $1,000s in the scanning part to make it kind of work. The Einscan person, I'm a fan of that. I know Brent,
me as well.
A friend of mine, likes that as well. Those are kind of affordable step in. So that's getting cheaper. But there is kind of like that on that CAD scanning part. That's something you're going to have to get to grips with. There's a little bit. It's not impossible, but it's not something you can do on the weekend or kind of idly during lunch. You're going to have to invest in that. And now beyond that, that's like the workflow question. Well, it's interesting, like this, the Daryl's question is like, okay, for a small shop, does it make sense? So you're going to have to do that investment, either outsourcing or learning it. You're going to have to buy that scanner, which for a small shop, let's say I'm one guy working alone, that's going to be like, a couple of grand, something like that. But then after that, I think it does save you a lot of time. I think that's the real thinking, that on the file front, we're talking sometimes like, we're talking like an hour, several hours per file or per case in a lot of cases, right?
Exactly. So there is that upfront investment of time and learning, which I know is frustrating because it's not fun to learn new processes. But once you get it dialed down, like you said, Joris, you can go through that much faster for future patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the question is like, what volume are you doing in these parts,
yes.
and what volume are you doing to outsource, which is also a valid kind of path to market as well. And what volume are you doing and what kind of parts, right, by yourself? And that I think is a really important question. And then how long are you taking now to deal with the files, to deal with like the cast if you're doing casting, to deal with your carver. Because in some cases, I could imagine that the workflow you have now could be advantageous. But generally, no matter if your shop is like, something gigantic, or you're a central fab working on a ton of parts, or you're just one person, she's working by herself, you're still going to on aggregate save money. And then it's a question of saying, okay, what's my investment in the equipment, and what do I need to do in volume? So there's a calculation there, but it's not a mysterious thing. It's like literally like I have this many test sockets, or I have this many parts times the cost now and times the cost per minute. And often in O&P specifically, we see a lot of time savings on the software front, as opposed to fiddling with a lot of intermediaries and casting and stuff. And we see a lot of savings on just like, certain push button workflows being much faster for people in the shop. That's really where it comes out. And also just like being able to do things more asynchronously. Like you take the capture the scan, that goes to some guy who cleans it up and then does the CAD for you. And then it gets outsourced, or you print it again. So in between that, you can just go and have fun, meet patients, have meetings, do all this stuff. And that asynchronous nature of this makes it very powerful for a smaller organization where you maybe have one technical staff, or maybe you are the technical staff, right? Then that kind of makes it very powerful. But the numbers do have to add up, and I think that's a volume question. But that's like a thing you do in Excel essentially. It's not like a leap of faith or anything. That's like literally like we have to do the math on that.
Absolutely. All right, and with that, Joris, I'm going to go ahead and continue on just in the interest of time, but I really appreciate your input. Really, really valid points. And he's exactly right. Yeah, it is exactly right. So now that we've covered kind of what you can do with it, let's get a little bit more into the details of how you actually pull this off. Because I'm seeing, with the poll results, a lot of the frustration is training and talent management. And hey, I need more convincing that these materials are actually good enough. And we're going to be getting to that today. So this is probably going to go a little bit long, so hang in here. But I think we have some really good content for you here. All right, as I mentioned, some of the good things that are happening is on the software side. So these are just a couple of different software options that are out there today. Again, there are many out there. These are just a sampling. I'm not necessarily recommending them, but they do come up quite a bit. So I hear Fit 360 come up quite a bit. I hear Toolkit 3D come up quite a bit. If you're on LinkedIn at all, you probably hear Spenties quite a bit. But what these three companies have really been focusing on is streamlining that whole digital workflow so that you don't need to figure out how those different softwares all connect together. Are they perfect? Probably not. Are they making improvements? Absolutely they are. And it is moving pretty fast, especially when you compare it to back to like 2019, 2020. It has gotten significantly better. So these are ones to kind of look out for. Additionally, beyond just the software side, there's been a lot of work being done in the automation front. So depending on how many devices that you're producing per week or per month, this may or may not be applicable. If you're producing 10 devices a month, then just go ahead and tune out right now. This isn't really going to matter to you. But if you're doing maybe hundreds or thousands of devices a month, or you want to scale to that, that's when this really matters. So what I just want to point out here is, at least with HP's printers, we've actually built in some automation so that you can do 2 back-to-back prints, I should say, without an operator there. So you could start a print, have it run over the night, stops in the middle of the night, changes build units, and starts the next print, maybe in 2 in the morning when no one's there, so that you can keep going. So that really allows you to scale. You don't need to have it right away, but it's there if you get there. Additionally, on the post-processing side, on the automation side, we're not going to get into the details of how the printing process actually works, but what I will say is with multi-jet fusion printing, we are printing with a powder, and there is a depowdering stage where you have to remove powder from parts. Now you can do that manually by hand. It's really not that hard, but as you're scaling and you're producing lots of parts, you might want to have an automated way to do that. And what I want to point out here is there is equipment out there that kind of operates like a dishwasher, where you put parts into the machine, hit start, and 15 minutes later, 30 minutes later, you get all those parts out and they're ready to go, and they're all consistent. And that's really the big part of it. So there is a lot of automation that has been developing over the years and has gotten significantly better, even in the last 12 to 18 months. So there are processes to scale, which is so great with this technology without having to add on a lot of extra staff to do so. All right, now let's get into the bad, because I know there's a number of pessimists out there, which is totally fine, but it's really important to face what's happening so that we're aware with it. As Joris kind of got into it a little bit, and as I hinted at it, there's reskilling that has to happen. You have to learn new skills. And look, sometimes it is intimidating to start and to figure out. What I will say is Joris, along with a number of other people out there, have been putting out a lot of great content to teach you how to learn these new skills. If it's scanning, if it's CAD file development, or just figuring out digital best practices. It's no different than if you're in the shop, you have best practices of how and where you have your tools and manage them and maintain them. It's the same kind of thing in the digital process, but it's a different workflow. And that takes a little bit of time to develop that actual muscle. If we move forward, I know there was a number of questions of saying, hey, I need convincing that these materials are even strong enough, and that's completely valid, and you absolutely should. There is a QR code here on the screen linking to quite a few more resources where we get into that. So myself and our team, we did some research on that specifically for prosthetic sockets and foot orthotics to compare traditional devices with additively manufactured devices, and tried to compare apples to apples as much as possible. How do they perform? What's the weak point? What's the failure point? What works well? What doesn't work well? And so if you take some time, we have some white papers linked on this webpage, and I will show this again at the end so that you can read through that. We also did webinars breaking down and explaining these white papers if you happen to not want to read that. And in those webinars, we talk through maybe what's not necessarily listed in the white paper, but giving more context as to how we approach the study, what we found worked well, what we found didn't work so well, and what we would do next time. But a little bit of a spoiler, we did find that the materials performed honestly better than I expected. So I think you would be pleasantly surprised. All right, moving forward. Additionally, the bad, and this is a little bit of what Joris was talking about as well. If you're a smaller shop and just getting started, it can be a little bit tricky. So a lot of people ask, hey, Dustin, how do I get started with this? What options do I have? There's basically 3 options that you can go with. The first one is, look, I don't want to deal with any of those digital workflows. I don't really care. I just want to get started with it. Just tell me what I can do. You can literally outsource the entire digital workflow if you wanted to, from scanning to printing parts, and then all you would have to do is actually fit the part to the patient, or fit the device to the patient, I should say. The trade-off with that is the piece price of each device is going to be higher, but the full solution price of getting started will be much lower, so your risk is much lower. Many times people don't take that approach. They might take the middle approach, is what I see, where they're kind of somewhat hands-on. So maybe they get a scanner, like Joris was mentioning, like an iScan. There are a number of scanners out there, and learn how to do the scanning process themselves. But then maybe they outsource the CAD work and the printing work, and then just fit the device to the patient. When you do that, your piece price comes down a little bit, but your solution price goes up because you're spending money on scanning equipment. Then the third option, of course, is you do the full workflow yourself. So you buy a scanner, you buy some kind of CAD package or CAD software that can actually create devices, you actually print the parts themselves, and you do any post-processing if it's required. It isn't required, but you can do that. And then you do the fitting itself. The advantage of that, of course, is your piece price is lower, but your solution price is higher because you have more CapEx to spend. All right, last section, the considerations. Here we go. Now, some big things that come up that you might not think about when you're getting into the digital workflows, which we have found to be pretty important, has to do with quality. So how do you measure quality? Are you even measuring quality today? And if you aren't, that's okay. In fact, I work with a lot of manufacturers in other industries that maybe aren't measuring quality today, bigger ones, and you'd be kind of surprised. But if you want to get that consistency, that repeatability, and known for quality, it is important to measure. And it depends on what tool you're using. Are you using a micrometer, or are you just using a tape to measure it? And how precise do you need it to be? Some people think and get fixated, hey, we need to have this certain level of precision. And other people realize, okay, there's a little bit of flexibility there. And that's where if you talk with experts at HP or like Joris, they can help guide you as to what tools make the most sense. And are you also auditing your process? Are you testing it to make sure that it's consistent and repeatable, regardless of who's operating it? Just like I was mentioning before, you know, we're all human and each person does it a little bit differently, but can you set up a process so that it's at least producing the same type of results as much as possible? And can you verify that employees are following quality practices? Now, there are some companies, like you can see in the lower right-hand slide here, where they went to an extra level of quality and they took, say, their foot orthotic and tested it out to millions of cycles to verify that their design makes sense and is going to have no issues. You can go to that level if you want. I don't know if you need to go to that level anymore, because a lot of companies and even HP has done a lot of that work for you already. But there are companies that will go to that level of quality. Moving forward, what I will also say is regulations. I've hinted at this before. Is insurance going to require new processes? I'm not sure. Maybe you all know something different than I do. Maybe that's coming, maybe that isn't, but I know that's been kind of a fear for a while. Additional considerations is training. I know that came up in the poll where a lot of people want to have training and they're struggling to figure out where to start. So a big thing that is pretty important is your staff, is your team ready to learn new skills? Are they that kind of personnel? And I've also found that some companies have told me, Dustin, you know, it's hard for us to attract new talent into our industry. Maybe having some of these more advanced tools and processes might enable you to attract higher quality or different types of talent out there. What you can see in the lower right, or the image at the right, that's a scan of my foot back in 2020 with a more simple scanner. And they've since gotten much, much better and more intuitive. In the beginning, it was challenging. You can see a lot of that noise. A lot of the tools out there today will eliminate that to make it almost dummy-proof. Other things, support. This is a very important thing. If you decide to move into the digital workflow space, this is going to be an ongoing and continuously advancing process. This is not just a one and done process, as much as we'd all like it to be. I think this is no different than the development of the computer, the iPhone, things like that. Each year there is going to be some kind of advancement that we all need to keep up on, just like we can see in this image here. It might not be significant. Maybe there are bigger steps, maybe there are less bigger steps, but it is moving. So it is going to require ongoing training, ongoing continuing education, and you're going to need partners to support you. Just like I said earlier on in the presentation, you know, you can be competitive, of course, but having that collaborative team of individuals that can keep pushing you all to be successful, it's going to be really important. Now, what I'll say, you don't need to use 3D printers or additively manufactured devices only for orthotics and prosthetics. If your company wants to be able to pivot into other industries, it's possible with this technology. And that's what's so amazing. Once you understand how this digital workflow works, it might allow you to expand into automotive or other healthcare applications, or maybe industrial equipment if you want. And you're doing the same process, but you're doing a whole different industry. And we saw this happen during the COVID pandemic. We saw Lamborghini pivot into making ventilators, and we saw iOrthotics pivot into making face shields and face masks. So this is something that can be pretty easily done depending on what the business needs are. Just as an example of how quickly you can pivot, this is something that we did internally at HP. So as soon as the COVID pandemic really started to lock things down, we thought, man, what can we do to really help people out? And so on a Saturday afternoon, we decided, hey, let's see if we can make some kind of face shield for people in the hospitals. By Monday in the morning, we had some prototypes. By Monday in the afternoon, we had some nurses actually testing it in a hospital. And by Friday of that same week, we had parts deployed to different hospitals all over the place. And we then since distributed those files to different service providers to print and deliver those face shield parts. And from March 24th to April 20th, we estimated we printed over 150,000 parts in that short time period. So we went from no design to a design that's validated, tested, printed, and delivered to nurses very, very quickly. So I'm hoping to show you, or I hope that makes sense, that you can pivot very, very quickly, especially once you understand how this technology works. And that is pretty powerful. In fact, there are some companies that have since done that. It's very possible that you've seen some pet orthotic devices out there. There is a company out there that did decide to pivot into devices for pets. I put a QR code there if you're interested to learn a little bit more about what they're doing. I think they're doing a pretty good job, I gotta say. Not something I thought of, but they decided to pivot into that area pretty quickly, and I would say probably pretty easily. But it's a similar offering, but geared towards pets. Kind of interesting. Additionally, scaling is modular. I know I hinted at this before, but with this technology, it allows you to scale as you do. So as I mentioned, you can add on additional automation equipment if or when it makes sense. But additionally, since we are printing in a cube, you can see I put in 43 different parts in a 12-hour print. Maybe you had extra smaller parts that you wanted to print as well. So I took this HP keychain, and it's about an inch across or so, and I was able to put in almost 100 more parts into that print, and it doesn't take any more time to print. As long as I can nest it into that cube, I can print it in the same print time. So there are a lot of advantages of what we can do. Additionally, I know there was a couple of people in the polls worried about the competition. It is definitely a valid thing to think about. So I have put some images here of some traditional devices on the left and additively manufactured devices on the right. And I would just ask you, looking at those images, if they were the same price or close to the same price, which one would you prefer to buy? What's your gut reaction tell you? Additionally, what do you think it's going to be in the future? Is it going in that direction? What do you honestly think? What do you honestly feel with that? Or would you even be willing to pay more? So the middle image there on the right, that's from a company called Active Armor. I think they got a pretty interesting business approach where you can actually wear these devices while still playing sports. So it allows you to continue on with your life even if you have an injury. You can even swim with it. I think that's a pretty compelling value proposition that might be a little bit better than a traditional cast, for example. Additionally, if the patient is wearing the device more and healing faster, maybe the insurance company is willing to pay more or more apt to pay for your device versus the competition. Are you prepared for that? And then additionally, what I'll say in the lower left, I don't have this working, but maybe the tech team can throw a link in the chat to this video. But artificial intelligence, I know that's all the rage that everyone's talking about and thinking about, and especially for those companies that are a little bit bigger out there. But HP has been dabbling with that, where you can do text to AI. So if you pull up that image or that video, you can see someone types in, a monkey wearing a cape or something like that, and it will generate a 3D design using artificial intelligence. This is still early stages, but it is going in that direction. So maybe one day someone could say, I need a generic size 9 for male foot orthotic, go. And maybe it can generate something like that. And that's a matter of just printing something like that. We don't really know where it's going to go yet, but if you're not looking at this now and trying to learn about it now, you could be left behind pretty quickly because it is moving very, very fast. All right, so conclusions. And we'll be pulling in Joris here in a little bit. Again, if you have questions, please throw them into the chat. So the good, if we look at the good, so we have efficiency and consistency from part to part because you're not relying on Tom to do the finishing versus Jeff doing the finishing and getting differences in the devices. Additionally, since you can put in more parts, you can get more parts in the same time. Since this is all digitally connected, you can aggregate a lot of the data, maybe even generate a lot of that paperwork for you. There's automation that's out there so that you can add it on as you scale. And we're being able to get more in different business applications if you so want to. The bad adoption challenges, learning new processes, if it's scanning or CAD or post-processing, learning new things, it can be a challenge. What I will say though, once you get some of those basic skills, they compound and you can get faster and do those processes faster, easier, and more consistently. And the considerations as we've gone through, regulations, compliance, and training, you're gonna have to keep up on it. This is not a one and done kind of thing, just like we're seeing with the tech boom, with the development of computers and phones. It really matters what kind of measurement devices that you're using to audit your processes and test your operators. And additionally, future trends, being able to pivot into new industries and new processes can be pretty powerful.
All right.
And with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into some questions. Before we do that, though, I'm just going to put a couple of additional resources up on the screen. So if you didn't get a chance to grab those links or those QR codes, we're going to throw a few out here. If you're a designer, we do have a link to a Multi-Jet Fusion Design Handbook where we highlight what's the thinnest wall you can print, what's the smallest through hole you can print, can you print threads, how do you post-processing. If you want to join us for some events and webinars, either in person or online, we have a link for that. And if you want to learn more details about different parts in the digital workflow, if it's scanning, software, CAD manipulation, or post-processing, you can take a look at some of these webinars here. Joris,
Right.
what did I miss or what comes to mind?
No,
We covered a lot.
Thanks for the presentation. I thought it was great. I loved, you just separated a lot of people's journeys into these, like just these categories. And I thought that was really handy, like the scan only and the scan and print. I think for a lot of people, you should study that because if you don't have people that are talented in software or love software, yeah, then the journey seems much simpler. If you don't have the floor space or if you don't have the kind of like the floor space to do the printing and the finishing, it's going to also be a much simpler discussion. So I think that really kind of is like really compressing the decision and really kind of forcing people to look at that. I think the cool thing is you can start with one and transition to other ones. I think that's a really good point to make as well. You don't have to just go out and make a decision from the get-go. You can kind of get in there. So I thought it was really, really helpful. I think really, really glad for that. So let's jump into a couple of questions. So first off, somebody asked, why do some prints fail even with the same previous settings? I'm not sure about this question. Personally, I'm like, if it's an FDM printer, it could be nozzle interference or material handling. And it could also be a G-code related type of problem, but probably in the material handling is where you're going to look for the problem. If it's a service related pattern of fusion question, I would probably guess that it's the orientation of the part is not being taken into account by your service partner and it wouldn't fail any other way. And if it's like, actually, like I own a LPBF, laser powder bed fusion machine, it's probably going to be a powder refresh rate, powder use kind of question. If that, and there could also be some gremlins in your file, if you will, if you did not properly account for certain kind of effects of heat or heat dissipation, or just like the handling of the file. That's probably the most likely, but for that person, Yusuf Salam, ask me personally afterwards if you want to delve deeper into that. Another question. Yeah,
Joris,
go on.
Can I just comment once there? So if you're newer into this space, one thing to think about is your environment, your printing environment is really important. So if you're printing in just a garage and it's not insulated, temperature controlled, humidity controlled, maybe one day it's 70 degrees and 20% humidity, and the next day it's 60 degrees and a lot more humidity. Depending on that environment can really impact your printer. So regardless of technology, airflow, temperature, and humidity are a pretty big deal. So you got to have some kind of controls on that environment. And if you don't, you could run into some print quality issues, even if you have the exact same settings. So that's something to pay attention to, especially for the newer people out there.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, the more variables you can eliminate and the more you can control your environment, the better, of course, with this. Okay, another question is from Catelia Afanadora. Sorry if I mispronounced that. How would you recommend approaching clinics to offer digital workflow integration? Asking for the point of view of a company that does high precision scan and CAD and in other industries, but is just not familiar with O&P. So for them, I don't know what you would say, Justin. For me personally, you need to work with a practitioner, and actually not via telephone. You need to visit them. And the highest volume practitioner you can find, the best, right? Because you want to see a lot of different cases, and you really have to understand what they're doing, because a lot of it is kind of like hacking stuff by hand, maybe, or really fine detail work, and a lot of the environment is also really chaotic sometimes. Oh, a patient, this, oh, somebody called, they fell. It's very different than kind of like a factory type environment, or kind of more where things are more regulated. And a lot of stuff depends on the personality of the people and the type of individual that person is. So, the really key element for this, if you want to sell services to this industry, is to get to know a number of practitioners and spend a day with them seeing patients and see what they're actually doing. Like what you're going to be running into if you're a standard scanning thing is people, bodies, they may not work very well with the scanners you have. There's going to be things like sweat. There's going to be like children that move a lot. There's going to be really scanning specific questions that are very difficult if you're not scanning humans before this. And just that whole kind of chaotic inpatient workflow thing is going to be a bit different. And there are some solutions to help you with that, like setting up and then kind of to make it more repeatable. That you should look at, but just definitely spend a day with an O&P practitioner and a high volume clinic. That'll really give you a good idea, I think. Martin von Schie is asking, what shapes are not possible? Now I make leather fuse for an AFO, and if strong fixation is needed. Can you recreate something similar? So yeah, Dustin, do you want to try and answer? I can try and answer as well if you want.
Yeah, so that's generally speaking with additive manufacturing, the more complex the design, the more successful it's going to be. Because we can print designs and shapes that you couldn't manufacture any other way. It depends on what you mean by success or failure. And this is kind of what Joris was getting at a minute ago. Just because you can print something doesn't mean you can always post-process it or get it to be exactly the way you want it to be. You'd have to elaborate a little bit more to give us more details of kind of what you're thinking along the lines of, but you can do a lot more with additive than you might think.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and you can make very, very tough, very, very strong parts with polymer as well. A lot of this stuff, like we can also make flexible materials. People also, that's really good for liners and for impact absorption. And you can combine materials or make an assembly that kind of absorbs something with a soft kind of impact, then has a kind of lattice structure to spread the weight or to offer rebound and also absorb the impact and make that impact less. So preemptively, I'm going to say, yes, you could do a lot of things, but there's a lot of materiality, I think, that you can't do with 3D printing really, because it's a very different type of thing. Like the leather example, the leather is an absolutely wonderful material. We can't recreate that. So that's actually a good example of something you couldn't do. Whereas to create that impact, we could probably make that impact, that comfort a lot better, or make it more comfortable, wicking sweat and stuff like that. So it's a different way of looking at it. So that's like a thing. And also there's technical limitations on size and wall thickness, of course, will always be taken into account as well. Are there more questions? Well, are there more things that you think, Dustin, you wanted to still talk about, or you want to still kind of like point out to people, I think? Because we are getting a lot of like workflow-y type, but also kind of technical questions more about the process, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think the big thing to remember is, and Joris, you've probably mentioned this in some of the other online content that you've done as well, is the important thing is just to get started. There's a lot to learn here, especially if you're just starting out. There are teams of people that can help you along this process faster. But the important thing is to just start, and you're going to have some failures. That's normal, that's to be expected. But the sooner that you start, the sooner you're going to get a better understanding of what is possible, or more likely what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Because look, we can print just about anything, but just because you can print it doesn't mean that's the best thing to do. Would you agree or disagree with me, Joris?
no, I think definitely like the mentality should be, what volume of parts am I doing, right? How much work is it costing? What resources do I have? What are my key things? Do I want to spend more time with patients? Do I want to meet more patients? Do I really feel that the worst thing in my practice is that I'm kind of rushing through patient meetings and I'm like, no, I want to sit down with this person. I want to deepen that relationship. I really want to understand them better. Is that the key thing? It's like, okay, so what do you need as a force multiplier for you? So how can you make yourself more effective? Now, part of that could be additive manufacturing, could be that fitting sockets or scanning them could be much faster, or it could have very little impact on you. It depends really if you're upper or lower extremity, what you're doing. It depends on a lot of cases on what role you are in the practice, whether you have a technical person backing you up or you're just doing everything, right? So where does it make sense? So I think that's a really important thing. And where can it be a force multiplier for you? And where can that workflow, and I think that's really important, where can that workflow really save you time and money, and at what volume does it start to pay it back? Because we've seen ROI on these things, the software plus the printers, be insanely high. Like we're talking about people paying off the machine in inside a year or something crazy like that, which doesn't really happen in a lot of industries. But that's at a certain utilization, right? These things, it's not a toaster, right? It's not a toaster. You need to spend time on it. You need to work at that post finishing, and you need to develop experience in it. So it's not for everyone. But for the people who make the good business case for it, it's an excellent solution. So I think, I'm not telling everyone to print. I don't think you would either. Depending on the volume, depending on the type of parts you do, it can be really advantageous to your practice. I think that's something we both agree on. So,
and I think the other thing to think about is, how do you want to differentiate yourself from your competitors? It doesn't mean you need to be super differentiated, but maybe you become the best at making leather-like textures. I mean, like you're just mentioning, you can't really do leather. You can get close to it, but maybe you have a team of people that really focus on that to try to make it as close to leather as possible. And maybe only your team can do that. And all of a sudden you become the go-to people for that. So figuring out where you want to position and really focus, I think really is important.
Yeah, totally agree. I totally agree. I think, and it should differentiate your business. You shouldn't be doing it because everyone's doing it. You shouldn't be doing it because Bob one town over is doing it. You should do it because it makes sense to you. And we're seeing that people adopt this. Small clinics do this, big clinics, central fabs, people that have a couple of offices, and people that are quite large or quite small businesses can adopt the technology. But it has to make sense in your journey, right? If your journey is leading you to a part where you want to make more in-house faster because you are in a place where people want things faster, want repairs faster, parts faster, it's just totally going to make sense for you. But then again, it'll make sense from a certain volume. Yeah, that's right.
And getting back to that kind of collaborative nature, like I was hinting at in the beginning. So I know a number of years ago, I worked with a couple of companies in Canada, and they were, 5 or less employees. And they said, look, on our own, we can't afford to buy this printer, or we can't afford to print these devices, but they reached out to some of their competitors nearby, and they were able to put together an agreement between 2 or 3 small groups of people. And they said, okay, we're going to together buy one printer and service all 3 of these different companies and go from there. So if you get a little bit creative, there are ways to do this.
Yeah, no. I think, but it should make sense. And I think it's a calculation. I think you guys are willing to help people with that calculation. It only makes sense to give people the right numbers and things like that. And I think that's something you should look into, delve into if you're looking at the volume that really pays off. Because if it does, then doing batch to batch these devices and batch to batch post processing them, and just doing, it's not click of a button, but several clicks instead of a lot of manipulation, a lot of work in CAD. I think it could be a real time saver and real differentiator, and something that could save you a lot, make you a lot of money. But again, it's not for everyone. I think you need to kind of march into this knowing the numbers, knowing that it'll make sense, and knowing that you'll have to spend time on it. I mean, I don't think we're going to tell people this is like easy, but it could be really beneficial if you master it. Let's say. All right. Everybody, thank you so much for doing all the polls, participating in them, asking so many questions. That was very nice. I hope this is useful for you. If you have any more questions, like use these links, use these QR codes, reach out to us to ask some more questions. We'd love to help you kind of learn more to understand if this is the right step for you to take. And yeah, thank you so much for your time, everybody. This is absolutely great. And thank you, Dustin, for doing this. It's great.
Thank you very much, Joris. It was a great conversation, and I think we covered a lot of great ground. So we're looking forward to more of your questions, everyone.
Yeah, totally. So keep engaging with us, and have a great day. And thank you so much for being with us today.
All right, goodbye.